I want to tell you one story because it totally pertains to your last statement. And that is, when I do the mixtapes, a key component in the storytelling is that I interview the artist. So I'm approaching it from a fan and a DJ's perspective to get certain things. But what happens is I only do these as audio interviews. When I switched to doing them as video interviews, the dynamic, the vibe changed. The best interview I ever did was with Mary J Blige, where like I went to meet her at her hotel room in it was in Midtown somewhere. And basically she answered the door in like a house coat and slippers and rollers in her hair. And she was so like at home and comfortable that it led to the best interview I've ever done of any of these, because it's true. Like, I'm definitely an introvert, man. Like, I don't, I also, I like people. It's not like I don't want to be around people, but I think my craft is kind of solitary. And so it's been a thing, even around these, Instagram lives, of letting people into my home. That took a minute for me to get comfortable with that idea, until you realize that everybody's in that position. And so it's time to like open up a little bit and let people into your world and your experience. So yeah, I think it's really just what you're doing, and I think you're gonna get amazing stuff from talking to people in their homes. It's really gratitude, honestly. Like I experience it as just I'm so fortunate to get to interact with these folks that were my heroes as a kid, and then also there's a respect that I have for these artists that means that I'm always operating from that place. Like, even when we are peers, I'm always looking at it from a fan's perspective in terms of what I'm creating with those artists. So that, again, it's kind of feeding that need. I had an experience as a kid where I was, kind of in the mix with kids of some famous people and this and that. So I never really got starstruck in that kind of way. I saw, famous people as real people. I saw the real problems that came with that. So it wasn't really a kind of, starry-eyed sort of thing. It was more just, this is something I love and I want to be closer to it. And however I can get closer to it, I want to do that. And then what started to happen is that love, like you said, there's a spirit or a soul in the music and in the mixtapes. That love is, I think, what that spirit is. And so the artists themselves would feel that. And that's what would create these relationships. So a lot of the time, what I poured into the mixtape, they would hear it first. And so by the time I met them, I've had experiences when I met Pasta News from De La Soul, he already had my Big Daddy Kane mixtape. Like, like when I met Alicia Keys, she had my Classic Soul mixtape. And it's like a really powerful introduction, I think, of who I am as a person to them. So that's what's kind of created this bond. And then, I mean, even beyond that, bro, like there's an experience where every time I've done a mixtape with an artist, and I went to that place of trying to kind of tell their story, I then became the tour DJ for that artist because they felt, themselves in the music. So this happened with Big Daddy Kane. This happened with CL Smooth. This happened with Q-Tip. This happened with Lauryn Hill. This happened with The Roots. And I'm still, DJing for Black Thought to this day. And I think a lot of that is that respect, is that love. And, I think when you realize that these folks are real people, it creates a different kind of dynamic. So I always pay respect as artists. I stand back and they're supreme and I'm a fan. But when I'm in the mix, I feel a responsibility to those artists to put them, in the best light. So that's kind of how I approach my craft. For me, it all goes back to the experience of a fan listening. And my earliest days were honestly on the dance floor. So, it was just what moved me. And that's what I gravitated towards. I think, then hip hop is like this kind of interconnected web of references and other, pieces that when you get really into it, you start picking things apart. And so I think that was the next phase, is me identifying what those pieces were. And, oh, that's from that. And, oh, that came from that. And then you start deconstructing it and you're turning the records over and you're looking for the samples and you're digging for that. And then I think, when I started making mixtapes, the earliest thing I really put my hands on was I'd take an acapella, I'd take a beat, I'd be like, oh, those things will go really well together. And we mix it live. As I've gotten more and more technically advanced, in my production abilities, I can take it to a whole other level. So we're breaking things down all the way and then building them back up. And I think that's what fed my production approach, is this idea that, like, hip hop has all these references and it has all these elements of history. And so, you know, the mixtapes are about pulling that history and making it relevant again. And then in my production, it's also like a sprinkling in of all these different elements to fit it into history. You know what I'm saying? So that, like, some people, the best compliment that has been paid to me is that, you know, I've kind of written myself into the history of this thing that I love by telling these stories in that way. And I feel like a responsibility to do that. Like, you know, you know, as a hip hop fanatic to do it like that. And so, you know, as I've evolved and my DJing and my production has evolved, you hear a lot of those elements in there. And then it's also like sitting at the feet of the masters. Like, I've spent the last 3 years working on this album, sitting with the best engineers I know and understanding the sonics and really like how things come together. And that's taken my craft even further. And again, I think if you take it to the root, it's like a love and a responsibility to, like, you know, hold that in the right light. And then that responsibility makes me work. You know what I mean? Like, it's a lot of work to put in that time so that I can get up and do it live and it feels seamless.